Are you encouraged? Seems to be my situation where I end up coming on the program each year following the very best speaker. So if I haven't met you yet, my name is Mark, and it is my privilege to have the leadership team of Ruth Harbor invite me to join the team when they had opened the doors for just 6 months back in 2002. It is a privilege now tonight to rehearse for you a testimony of God's evident leading and guiding in Ruth Harbor's story. There were no maternity home experts in central Iowa in 1996 to begin the work of caring for young women and their children. But God used 3 unlikely women, individually and separately called, who were simply willing to say yes. All 3 Ruth Harbor founders have always said, it was always about God, and it was His idea, not ours. A group of community social experts joined the early organizational meetings, but God led our founders to withdraw from that group who valued shelter and help, but not Christ-centered programming. The founders had no money, were young, no board experience, no social services background, no nonprofit experience. But God provided unsolicited gifts of $100,000, another one for $250,000, a graduate student to write the articles and the bylaws, and brought additional help through skilled volunteers and board members. The founders rode with a realtor to see a potential house, and a very important tool in the ministry that they had in mind. But on their way, God led them to ask about Ruth Harbor's first home as they drove by it. After looking, that initial house on 42nd Street seemed to be perfect, but the offer for the home had already been made and accepted by another individual. But God led that individual to withdraw his offer, very unusually, so that Ruth Harbor might purchase it. Renovations of that first home were moving very slowly and just volunteers working on the weekend, but God stirred the interest of a local contractor, a construction company, who stepped up and completed the project so young women could be served beginning in 2001. In the early years, I remember going to the mailbox several times to determine if the contributions would allow us to pay the staff later that same day. But God has allowed us to make every payroll, become debt-free, and through the gifts of those with a passion for life, we have operated in the black ever since. When the need for a second home came along, to meet the growing needs of moms after their babies were born, God provided a church-owned home to use. But after a year of waiting, renovation plans fell through and the opportunity ended. But God, over the next 3 weeks, offered 3 additional offers from them to us, not our solicitations, and each of those homes were better than the ones that we had already, or the one that we had our hearts set on. The Macaulay home in Carlisle, the Macaulay home, I'm saying that right, thank you, where the world's first septuplets were raised, was one of those 3 homes offered to Ruth Harbor. In a step of faith, the board authorized me to sign an offer for that home. It was perfect for our needs, but would create significant debt again for the ministry. The closing date and opportunity for closing document arrived on my computer screen about 4 p.m. on a work day. I decided to sleep on it and then sign the paperwork in the morning. But that afternoon, about 5 o'clock, God led a key supportive church to reach out to my phone. And they said, "We understand that you're thinking about buying a home." I said, "That's true. We would like to help." The closing on the Carlisle home was postponed an additional 3 weeks, and we carried a check into that closing meeting for the entire purchase amount. Praise God. The work done by Ruth Harbor, as you've heard from Mark, is difficult and can be discouraging. We wade into relationships filled with trauma and brokenness. The work is not for the faint of heart, but God has called us and has faithfully given life and life change to many moms and children. One resident was given a 1% chance that her baby would live at birth. We prayed and prepared with donated funeral services, casket, and support services. But God gave that resident the 1% experience we had prayed for, and we joyfully scrapped our funeral plans and celebrated God's goodness with her. Another resident was unwilling to speak because of her family-imposed trauma. The staff team determined that we would accept this 14-year-old into our program anyway, because otherwise she would be returned to her country and her village of origin and face stoning. We're not used to hearing that in our culture, but God changed the heart of that young lady. Her pastor related a few years later how she was the leading example of the single moms in his church. During pregnancy, another resident was burdened to place her child for adoption. The process was being threatened by an uninvolved, disgruntled birth father. But God provided a partnering maternity home in another state where she could go and give birth free from her local circumstances with safety and freedom. Today, that alumna has a blossoming career of 12 years with the United States Department of Agriculture in Ames. She and her family have become personal friends of my wife, Deb, and I. Over the years, many of our alumni have been prepared to leave Ruth Harbor with no means of transportation. But God, through many people in this room and around our community, have provided donated cars so that they could step into their new lives. Recently, we engaged 3 or more Ruth Harbor alumna who have, for a second time, become homeless. But God has used new staff support, partner relationships, to guide these women back to another place to live. 2 of those courageous women are actually with us here tonight. Do you see God's fingerprints on this ministry? The evidence of God's leading and providing in and through this ministry is indisputable, and these are just a few of the examples, let alone the ones I'm not telling, and probably many I don't know about. In the past 3 years or so, we have lost 4 board members representing 68 years of combined service experience, due primarily to the 15 years maximum that they can serve by our bylaws. Since then, we also experienced losses to our staff team, heart attack, Parkinson's disease, and other family trauma, along with a director who decided to semi-retire. But God, but God has met the ministry's need with new board members and a skilled, unified, and committed staff team. They're doing things I never dreamed possible when I was the director. The but God stories, the vision and the direction are growing all the time. So, where will God lead and provide into the future? I'm inviting Chris Eller, my boss, to come up here and share exactly what that looks like. Let's welcome Chris.